Hello, everybody. This is James Donnelly with Safe Haven Insurance, your Medicare and health insurance safe place. I am sitting here today with a good friend and colleague, John Zenir. He is an estate planning attorney. First, I wanted to talk about this weekend. Last week, I had the honor of interviewing Rosemary Clubfeld from Suffolk County Blue Star Moms. She had a terrific event on Saturday. I know we were talking about it online and on our podcast and really trying to get the word out there. She had an amazing attendance. I would say a little less than 200 showed up. There were some great vendors. And I really learned a lot about veterans and awareness and a lot of the issues that they're facing coming home. And the difference between our veterans coming home during World War I and World War II, and then transitioning, through Vietnam, the Persian Gulf War, and then Iraq and Afghanistan. There are a lot of issues that they're facing, and if we can help our veterans transition back to civilian life, we would help so many lives. So I'm going to ask, this is an outreach, I'm going to ask my audience, my friends, my colleagues to do as much as possible to help our veterans. And John, you were actually talking about, Newsday had a big article this morning on veterans' health. And then what else did you say this weekend?
Well, what happened first, you mentioned, James, thanks for inviting me, by the way. I always enjoy
Of course, my pleasure.
We always have quality conversations, you and I.
Always do.
No question. And, what happened was Newsday pointed out a 2-page article where they have passed additional funding for mental health, which is sorely needed. And one of the populations that they're targeting will be veterans. And equally importantly, they're going to be targeting school children. School children are really in a tough bind. And it just so happens last night, 60 Minutes did a special on veterans. I immediately texted Rosemary to talk to her about some things. And what they're finding is that the children of veterans are having great difficulties. So, for example, they had these beautiful little teenagers who were 15 years old. They're becoming a parent. Okay, they're being parentified by the problems that the veteran is bringing home, and it's taking so long to heal. There's so much that needs to be done.
Which I never ever thought of. No. The children of veterans and the issues that they face. And ironically, it was discussed at this conference. And another thing that was said, and I'm going to reach out to all of my healthcare professional listeners and friends, they're saying that when veterans go to the doctors about mental health issues, doctors never ask them, "Are you a veteran?" It's never been asked. So that's another thing. How could our medical professionals, our doctors, our therapists, get a clear diagnosis or even a clear picture of what's going on in someone's life if that question is not asked? Are you a veteran? Have you served overseas? So I think as a society, we have so much to learn. And I don't think there's enough information out there, but that's why we need to get involved with groups like the Blue Star Moms and really dig into how we could help them. Because after all, I said it during my last podcast, they lay down their lives for us every day. Whether they feel like getting up in the morning and going to work, they have no choice. They enlisted to defend and protect our freedoms. Let's defend and protect them when they come home. And it's
clearly it's something really needs to be done in a big way. And you mentioned, you're reaching out to your audience to get more involved. And I think the other thing that we should do is those of us who are involved with any mental health organizations should be putting some pressure on them to make them aware of the fact that they, as a mental health organization, whether they're private or a 501c corporation, this is a population that needs help. And it's not only the veterans, and I guess it began in Vietnam. Before that, a veteran came home, everybody knew who the veteran was.
Everyone cheered for them.
Now, because of Vietnam and the protests, all the veterans who are my age,
John, they were ordered not to wear their uniforms home from Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then when they did come home, they were spit on.
Yeah.
Isn't that disgusting?
Terrible. And it hasn't stopped.
So an interesting factoid is we haven't won a war since World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, really, our troops haven't felt victory since World War II. They were pulled out of Vietnam. They were pulled out of the Persian Gulf. They were pulled out of Iraq. They were pulled out of Afghanistan. So it's almost like their sacrifices were for nothing.
And the other thing is that we now have more and more men and women who are making the military a 20-year career. So it used to be when I was a kid, a guy would do a tour of duty in a foreign place where there was a battle, where there was a war going on or a conflict. They'd be there once. Now they're back. They come home for 3 months. They're back in another conflict zone. It's like what used to happen decades and decades ago with the British Empire. We have a specialty group of people who are in the military, which is a very small percentage of the population, and we're not treating them with kid gloves. We should be giving them so much more than we give them.
I agree.
It's a disgrace. And one of the people I'm going to talk to is somebody I know at a very large mental health organization, and see if I can get them together with Rosemary relative to the possibility of putting together some programs, centered around seeking out veterans who need help. Now, they mentioned one group, I think it was Central Nassau Guidance in the newspapers, which is CN nowadays.
Okay.
They're reaching out to veterans, which is good. But
we have to do whatever
everybody
we can.
should be doing
Everybody
it. It's a big problem.
And another interesting fact is that during World War II, World War I, World War II, we had a known enemy that we were fighting. And it wasn't until Vietnam where we were fighting guerrillas. We didn't know who they were. They didn't have uniforms. And then now our military is fighting, and they're supposed to, fight the enemy and protect the civilians. But now we're fighting civilians. We don't know, women, children, we don't know who the enemy is, and it's really disturbing. And there's a lot of moral crisis now going on with our veterans because they don't know. They don't know who the enemy is. But we don't do enough for our veterans. They sacrifice their all for us. And I'm truly grateful to be an American, and I'm truly grateful for our military for protecting us. So thank you, veterans, for everything that you do for us. It was a great event, Rosemary. I truly appreciate it, and next year it's going to be even bigger. I promise you we're going to get the word out sooner and really blow it up and have the most acknowledgement for Blue Star moms, because after all, they sacrificed their children freedom for ours. So I truly appreciate our vets and our Blue Star moms. So John is a friend of mine. He is an estate and trust attorney. His resume is far beyond that, but he specializes now in estate and trust. John was a business owner, the early part of his life, and decided to go to law school. When did you go to law school? In your 40s?
I went to law school. I started practicing when I was 42.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
He just wanted to do more and touch more people, and that's kind of how I got into health insurance and Medicare. John was a matrimonial and custody attorney for many, many years. He is so well known. In fact, I didn't even know that. John and I were having breakfast one morning, and what was that? The Nassau County Family Court clerk?
That's right.
She came in for breakfast, and she stopped, and she said, "John Zenir? Oh my goodness, I wish every attorney could be like you. You are so missed." And I said, "John," I was so confused because I thought he just did estates and trusts. But he is very, very decorated through his career, and now he is touching people and helping people with estate planning.
I've been blessed to meet an awful lot of good people, including you, James, over the years. And like I tell everybody now, I'm a recovering trial lawyer, having done trials every single day for the last 30-some-odd years in divorce and custody and child neglect and so forth. And I'm getting out of that because what happened is about 15 years ago, people started to come to me who were interested in me helping them with an estate plan after I had worked with them previously in the litigation area. So I'm at this point now that's all I'm doing. I'm not going to be going into court anymore, knock wood, and just doing estate plan because there's a huge need out there. The lack of planning that we do, when I talk to friends, relatives, and neighbors, and I hear about the great detail, how they put so much time into doing something for their children centered around Little League or learning how to take the PSAT test. They're going here, going there, and playing AAU basketball 24 months a year. We spend so much time preparing certain things, but we do nothing to prepare for what the future is going to bring. And, so my goal is to basically help people make a better future for themselves.
Well, John, that's why I invited you here today. And as everybody knows, and if you don't, I talk about it all the time. How I got into Medicare originally was my grandmother, very healthy 80-year-old woman. Worked every day, drove, went shopping. One day, she had a fall. She broke her hip. She went to the hospital. She had surgery. She went to rehab center. We thought she was going to recover. I mean, our grandmother was invincible. She was the supreme matriarch. She was always doing, going, and helping. That changed her life, and we realized very quickly that we weren't prepared. Neither was she. We didn't plan for anything, and now something as simple as a Medicaid application, I couldn't do without a power of attorney. We couldn't, we had no will. There was a will, but during Sandy, she lost the will. So there was no power of attorney. There was no will. There was no plan for anything. Now, my grandmother has no assets, but those two simple documents, a power of attorney and a will, because after all, you need those things in order to do anything. And what I didn't understand was a power of attorney is only good until death. And then after death, the power of attorney goes out the window. And now you have everybody trying to figure out what's going on, who's the leader of the pack, and that's where a will comes in. So I see that, and then I see my parents. They haven't planned. I think they just did power of attorneys for each other, but I'm almost certain there's no will in place, and no one's discussed it with me. I guess they assume, like most people do, that one spouse is going to be alive longer than the other one. So whoever is alive will handle the estate. Now, is that a good way to be? What do you suggest? Because I'm learning this, and there's so many seniors that I talk to every day that have no plan in place.
And when you talk to them, you probably do the same thing I do, and that is, why is it you didn't do any planning yet? Most people say, well, I'm just procrastinating. Well, I really don't have that much. Well, it's too expensive. Well, it's too time-consuming. The reality is they just don't get around to it because we in our community have not made it a priority. So I think the simpler we try to make it, the better. What I try to do is to convince people, first and foremost, you've heard of healthcare directives. Do your healthcare directives and your wealth care directives. Very simple. For well under $1,000, they can go ahead and do two things. The healthcare directives are obvious. You mentioned power of attorney.
Well,
and
for our audience, let's speak layman terms. What are healthcare directives?
A healthcare directive is information that you put together in a document. One called a power of attorney, the other one called a healthcare proxy, where you say what you want a substitute person to do if in fact you're unable to do something. Your grandmother became immobile. My grandmother at one point was immobile in the hospital. We had a power of attorney so we could pay the rent. We could go ahead and pay taxes. We could make deposits in her checking account and so forth. Without that, nothing could get done. It's so important. So the power of attorney allows a third party that the person trusts to go ahead and substitute themselves to do all of the day-to-day things that the person who's temporarily disabled, was able to do usually. The healthcare proxy also says this is the person that I want to take care of my health decisions if, in fact, I'm unable to make those decisions. It's so important to have both of those. But another thing that people don't realize is to do what I call wealth care directives.
Okay.
It's very simple. Everyone has...
Is that a play off of healthcare directives?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Well, because the reason I mention it is because people don't think of this. Okay. The best example I can give you is I represented a perfectly nice lady who was married to a fellow who retired. For 40 years he was working for the state. Well, he got divorced once after 10 years. He died after he retired with the woman he was married to for 30 years. Mm-hmm. Problem was he forgot all about taking care of his wealth care directive and changing the beneficiary from the first spouse to the second spouse.
Oh my goodness.
Now this poor lady who was the second spouse was living on $2 a month. She couldn't have the money to hire an attorney and get into court. It was just one problem after another because that gentleman didn't look to take care of a wealth care directive. A wealth care directive, in my parlance, my verbiage, what I'm talking about, is really quite simple. Take a look at all of the accounts you have and make sure the money is going to go to the person you want it to go to. So, for example, most accounts, stock account, whatever it may be, will allow you to put a beneficiary there, okay? Most bank savings accounts, savings, checking, will also allow you to have a beneficiary, or you can put someone on as a second name and put the account in trust for them. So now, if you label those accounts properly, now all your heirs have to do, the person you want to get the money, they just have to take the death certificate and go in there and say, my mother Jane passed away, here's her death certificate, here's her account, please let me have that, and they'll get it. But there's one thing that they have to do. There's one thing, and this is something that sometimes is very hard for people to do. You must make sure that your accounts are payable on death accounts or transferable on death accounts.
So interesting. So you have to make sure that they're payable on death or transferable on death.
That's right.
Okay. And how do you do that? Because that seems pretty basic. Like most people would think, my mother is my beneficiary, my husband, my wife is my beneficiary, my daughter, my son is my beneficiary, and that's good enough. Is that good enough?
It's not.
Because it's an assumption, really.
It's an assumption that isn't necessarily correct.
Okay.
Which is why what I do is I make sure that every person I deal with, if they want to go this direction, is they give me their accounts and I contact the banks. And I insist that we receive a letter from those institutions saying that this account is transferable on death. And if it's not transferable on death, what can we do to make it transferable on death? Because keep in mind, if I walk into a bank to check to see if my savings account is automatically transferable on death, I'm talking to a perfectly nice person sitting on what they call the platform in banks, who may or may not know the answer. The branch manager may or may not know the answer, because keep in mind these contracts that banks have when they put together an account that you sign that this is the account I want, those are negotiated by the legal department. So the best place to get that information is with the legal department. Not a lot of people feel comfortable talking with the legal department, but that's one of the reasons they're there, is to answer important legal questions for their account holders.
And you could handle that for your clients.
That's what we do, or they feel comfortable enough to do it themselves. But so many problems could be taken care of. I'll give you an example. A fellow who I know died at the age of 76, very unexpectedly, healthy as could be. He passed away.
Isn't that always the case? They're always as healthy as can be, and it's always unexpected, right?
One Friday night, he's watching TV, he was gone.
Oh, my goodness.
He told his kids everything's taken care of. Well, guess what? Nothing was taken care of. He made a mistake. He had a will in his portfolio, but he never signed it. He had two witnesses that signed it, but he never signed it, and there was no notarization, no witness, nothing whatsoever. But thank God he was smart enough that he had about 4 accounts worth about $300,000.
Okay. Substantial amount of money.
Went immediately to his obvious heirs.
Okay.
And now they were able to go ahead and pay the real estate taxes and so on and so forth. And although they're held up in probate, they at least are able to pay from the resources that he left them the expenses that are coming up now at this point in time.
Wow.
So it's there's a little thing like that can save so much time and money.
It's a lot of little things that add up and create havoc, really. So first step you recommend is a healthcare directive, which is a power of attorney, and a medical proxy, correct? Okay.
Yes.
And now we're talking about wealth care directives. And so the first step is to make sure that you have a beneficiary on all of your accounts and make sure that the accounts are transferable on death.
Exactly.
And don't just take the bank's word for it, but make sure you have something in writing from the bank's legal department so that there's no issues. What kind of issues could you have if you don't have that? Let's say you are the beneficiary, right? So let's say you are the beneficiary, and you assuming that it's transferable on death. What kind of issues could you run into at the bank with that account?
Well, it may very well be that the bank's policy or the bank's contract with you actually says that only a court order will be sufficient to transfer the money to you.
So what does that exactly mean? They would have to go to probate court and get it? Oh, my goodness.
Now, probate is when there's a will.
Okay.
If there's no will, then you do an administration. It's just a technical word.
Okay.
Will, one word.
Now, probate's a pretty scary word, and we're going to talk about that later because everybody hears probate. Everyone gets scared, like, we had a loved one pass away. It's in court. In probate court. So we're going to talk about that. So it's a possibility that upon death, the account is not transferable and they need a court order. So what kind of court order if it's not probate?
Well, what would happen if there's a court order would have to come out from the probate court. That's called the place where you go is surrogate's court.
Okay.
Not Supreme Court, not county court. Every county has a court in New York State called surrogate's court.
Okay.
That's the court that you go to, and there are different applications that can be made. When there's a will, you make an application to probate the will. If there's no will, you make an application to be appointed to be the person in charge of that particular estate. Okay? You fill out a bunch of forms, you send it into court, and then sometimes you wait 3 months, 6 months, before they begin to react, because
it sounds pretty complicated.
It's very busy.
That just a legal document from the bank's legal department says the account is transferred. Because at that point, you just said 3-6 months, and I've heard horror stories of longer.
Oh, it can be much longer. Sure.
But now you have a funeral to pay for, you have property taxes to pay for, you have other expenses that need to get paid. And you don't have access to that money, so that's a big deal. So a way to avoid that is to just simply make sure that the bank's legal department says that the funds are transferable on death. Is that correct?
That's right. It can make such a big difference to people who need to go through the probate process or just wait for the other properties to be approved by the court to distribute, because now they'll have something that they can maintain the properties with, instead of money coming out of their own pocket.
So those seem like pretty simple steps, and you said
it does.
You could do it for $1,000. Like really,
that sort of thing can be very inexpensive.
So we could handle. So you would handle the power of attorney. You would handle the medical proxy, right? And then you would handle what did you call it? The wealth directive.
Wealth care. I call it wealth care directive.
Wealth care directives, which would be making sure all of those accounts were transferable on death. That's a pretty nominal fee to avoid a lot of chaos and confusion upon death.
There's no question. And I think once this sort of thing becomes regular policy, when people start to see what's happening out there, the word spreads, they'll begin to do it themselves. With the wealth care directives, to just make sure that mom and dad are going to be creating the right kind of account. But nobody ever thought of it before.
So That's amazing. That's great. And hopefully everybody calls you to help them, or calls their trusted attorney to help walk them through those pretty much basic steps to planning. Now, we spoke about probate and surrogate, and so those are courts, obviously. And when would you use those? Are we talking about a will? You said something about a will. So what does a will actually do? Why is it important to have a will?
Well, a will is where the person who is eventually going to die, like all of us, decides where I'm going to leave what I have. What do I have? To whom am I going to leave it? Okay? There are, of course, ways to avoid that if at all possible and do something different, but that's what a will does. Many people only want to utilize a will, okay, instead of having, for example, only accounts that are in a second name,
okay, so
that it'll pass automatically. That's, you can avoid the process. But when there's property that you can't avoid, going to probate, one of the things that people do is they create a will.
Okay.
That says who gets what. Now, sometimes you need a will anyway, just in case things happen, but that's much more sophisticated.
Because what I learned was that power of attorney is it's on death. It's no longer good. And now what I learned from my grandmother is we needed a will in place for somebody to make decisions upon death. So a will would in essence do that.
Well, the will first of all, you also, one of the things that should be done by everybody, I did it years ago, is prepay your funeral.
Oh, okay.
In New York State, that's another wealth care directive, I suppose.
Okay.
But in New York State, we have a program where I can go ahead and pay for my funeral today, live another 20 years, and the price never goes up. And what I do is I tell the funeral director, this is what I want. I want 6 cars. I don't care what the kids say. I want that $80,000 coffin.
I don't know. Okay, so that's great. I do respect that. But my grandfather prepaid for his final arrangements, okay? He wanted to be cremated. He didn't want a service. Now, we're going off topic, but as a grandson, as I know my father, as a son, as my aunts and uncles, as my grandmother or wife, we felt no closure whatsoever. And we mourned, and we didn't know how to mourn because we had no closure. So I think, just as someone who's been through that, I think it's an amazing thing to prepay and pre-plan your funeral, but I think it's something that needs to be discussed with your family, because I know my father actually did it, and my father said that he doesn't want to be laid out. He doesn't want a funeral. He wants to be cremated, and that's the end of it. But here I am again. And I know I'm being selfish because I'm using upon my father's, God forbid, passing, but I'm going to feel lack of closure. I really am. So it's something that really is a great tool, but it should be discussed with your family, and you should consider the feelings of your family as well upon that planning.
I think you're 100% right, and so that particular concept goes back to our lack of conversation about the planning process in general. And you hit on one thing that was very emotional for you and your family.
It was very emotional.
Which more and more people are opting for cremation. Okay, I don't know. Everybody has their own individual choice, of course, but it would be so much better if everybody would have that conversation with their immediate family, so they could share that reason for that choice.
And it's not an easy conversation to have.
It's not. None of these conversations
I agree. But these are, my wife says to me all the time, John, that when there's a problem, like sometimes I push it aside and I don't discuss it. And she thinks that I think that it's going to go away, but I don't think it's going to go away. I'm just waiting for that perfect time to discuss it. But in actuality, there is no perfect time
Well, you
to
bring up
discuss
two
it.
important points. You're procrastinating, but maybe procrastinating is also waiting for the facts to develop too. But either way, it's always better to start the conversation and say, look, let's give some thought to what we're going to do about this particular issue, and then set aside some time. When I represented kids, okay, as an attorney
I
for
heard
children,
that the other
years
day.
and years ago.
I was talking
Yeah.
to an attorney the other day, and he said, "Did you know John Zenir was what do they call it?
They used to call us law guardians.
Law guardians, an attorney for the child, right? So
Now
that was amazing. So you
Yeah.
protected children.
Right. So what I used to tell parents when they were going through a divorce, okay, where they were going to be separating physically for the first time and sharing this child, I said it's very important that you keep the lines of communication open and make sure your child understands that you think your spouse is the greatest thing since Pepsi Cola. Best dad, best mom. Why? Because that'll help the child, okay? And so what I always suggested to them, I said, I'd like you to try to use one technique. I'd like you to tell your son and daughter or whomever that every third Wednesday of every week, of every month, mom and dad are getting together. Dad'll come, so whoever's got the kids, the other parent will come to the other house, say, it's the third Wednesday, we're going to the diner, we're talking about you guys. Because they love that. They're empowered.
That's a great idea.
My parents love me so much that they, even though they're divorced, they're still getting together to make sure all of the good stuff is happening.
I know in some cases, because I've heard some horror stories regarding divorce and custody, that in theory is a great idea. And I could see if you could force yourself to do something like that, it would be beneficial to the children. But a lot of times, parties are selfish and
we're human beings. We're human beings.
Their emotions get in the way, but I could see how that would benefit. I don't know, in every case, is it a realistic demand? I don't think so, but it could be if we let our, as my wife says, if we let our egos get out of the way.
Right, and that's the hard thing. I always told the parents the following, only because it was true, okay, and that is every single time one spouse says or allows someone else to say something negative about the other spouse in front of the child eventually says, holy cow, I'm 50% that. I must be bad too. Oh. That's what they learn. We don't realize that's what we're teaching them.
So let's kind of get back on track. Let's kind of get back on track. It was very interesting. I love the insight on that.
That's the problem with you and I talking.
Having difficult conversations with our loved ones.
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to do in order to plan. And what I find helpful, and again, and I'm going from my life experience, and I'm sure you have a lot more life experience than I do. My wife and I, because our big thing was, we say we're going to get life insurance for the children. We say we're going to go to the bank and add each other on as beneficiaries. We say we're going to do a will. We say so. And then one day, she said to me, James, we've been saying a lot lately. We've been saying a lot lately, and we've done nothing. And it's not because we're procrastinating, because we are not by any means.
You're busy people.
Life is in front of us. Her career, my career, the children, our external family, our extended family, birthday parties, soccer, I mean, vacations. So life gets ahead of us. So what we did was, and ironically, it was about 3 weeks ago, we said, and we had this conversation we say a lot and we do nothing. And I said, let's put it on the calendar. Like I schedule everything for work and plays and concerts. I put everything on a calendar because it's important so we don't forget. Put it on the calendar. Right? It's not a list. Don't make it a list, because the list, we have 100 lists on the counter of things that we'd like to do. But it's not an actionable item until it's scheduled. So we scheduled it. We said we're going to go meet with an attorney this day. We're going to go to the bank this day. We're going to do life insurance this way. And I find that we are checking off our lists, and it's really gratifying because we feel like we're accomplishing something
good, I know.
as a team.
Right.
So for our married listeners, schedule it. Like, don't talk about it. Schedule it. Have those uncomfortable conversations and get it on the schedule and make appointments with an attorney like John or somebody else and get those basic healthcare directives, right? Am I saying it correctly?
You did.
And wealth care directives in place.
Excellent.
Okay. We have to get it scheduled. Pre-plan your funeral. You could prepay your funeral as well, and you don't have to pay it in one shot. You could drop off $100 a month, $200 a month, and my grandmother has that, and it's in a money market account at the funeral home, and it's collecting interest because obviously the cost of funerals goes up every year, and it's growing so that this way here, when she does pass, it's already taken care of. So that's one thing to plan with that. Now, wills. Back to wills because we went off topic. Back to wills. So the importance of a will is basically to have your final wishes.
It's the beginning. It's the beginning of your legacy plan. This is the items I have. These are the people to whom I want to leave it, and this is how I'm going to do it. Okay, so your will would put in all of the information about those three issues. Okay, and very specifically, as far as your calendar goes, my wife and I sit down around the first of the year every year, and we put in anniversaries, birthdays. Those are the most important things.
Of course.
Family things that you got to do. And then we put in the other stuff, like you said, and it works. And the other thing is relative to planning for your estate, most people take 2 or 3 hours with their advisor, myself, to figure out what to do. And we change our minds. They change their minds sometimes. It's a very emotional thing to do. But at the end of it, when you finish doing that, you feel like you have the weight of the world lifted over your shoulder.
Absolutely.
Because you finally did what you knew you should have done many, many years ago. So now the will is the basic way to share items, okay? Now, if you don't have real estate, that may be all that you need.
Okay.
But if you have a parcel of land, a home and a vacation home, you really need to consider to put those pieces of real estate into a trust.
Okay, we're going to get to trusts.
Okay.
Because I know how important
You
that
have
is,
more questions?
and I'm going
Go ahead.
to lead into a trust actually right now. So that will. Is that set in stone? Is that etched in stone?
The will.
Because you hear these horror stories of family members coming out of the woodwork, like, that's an analogy, or like vultures hovering over the estate, pecking at it. Is that will set in stone? Is that the end all be all, or are there horror stories or bad things that can happen?
Money creates problems.
Okay.
No question. And the will can always be contested. So that was something that the person who's leaving the items to 3 out of 5 kids and not taking care of the other 2 kids, okay, those other 2 kids may contest the will. Okay, now there are things that one can put in the will that will help the person who died to get what they want done. Okay. But it's like our country is based on the ability for people to have access to the courts. And the same thing holds true not only in civil litigation about businesses and so forth, and also custody and divorce. Same thing holds true for estates. So that people who believe they're entitled to something, but they were left out by mistake or maybe undue influence, they can always bring a suit and contest the will, unfortunately. So it can, there's always the possibility.
So that's scary. So now that 3 or 6 months in surrogate or probate court now
become 3 years. You never know.
3 years. And who's covering the expenses on mom and dad's house? I mean, Can the real estate be sold if it's in probate?
You would have to get permission from the court to do that. And keep in mind, if the will is contested, you're going to have to hold on to some of that money, maybe all of it, in escrow until the will is resolved.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It can be. It can be. I have a lady coming in today, tomorrow, coming in to sign her trust that she's put together, and she just finished doing estate litigation over a brother's will.
Okay, so that's the second time you used that word, trust. And we hear the word trusts all the time. Is there a difference between a will and a trust?
A will,
or do they work together? Explain.
First of all, we have to kind of put the will aside, okay, talk about the trust, and then there may be individual fact patterns where it's good to have a trust and a will.
Okay.
And maybe we'll have time to talk about that, but that might be
another interview. Because I'm really enjoying this, John. I really am. This is great, and I'm trying to get information out there for our listeners and for people who don't know about this stuff.
You're asking really great questions.
Okay.
We're taking a pretty deep dive.
Okay.
A deep dive, but it's a mile wide, but each of these topics could go 2 miles deep.
I know,
too.
and I'm going to have you on again. And I'm going to have you on again because there's so much information out there.
It's amazing.
That needs to be uncovered. And like I uncover the truth and I guide people through the Medicare maze and the health insurance maze. But what you do is I feel more valuable because you are really tying it all together. So we still have about 15 minutes left, but I want to hear about this trust, but and explain.
Well, I'm going to give you the short course in the difference between a will and a trust.
Okay.
A will is a public document, that can go into the surrogate's court and wind up being available to anyone. Okay. Now, keep in mind, it's not unusual for people to do a will, but the couple who have died have already taken care of all of the property some other way, such as having transferable on death. Maybe they've already sold their home and distributed the home if they had one. So it's not mandatory if there's a will out there that it has to go into court. It could very well be that the parties, both the beneficiaries and the people who are in charge of the will, are satisfied that everything's been distributed pursuant to the will without any problem. Okay, so not everybody goes to court, but it does happen. Okay, if there's a dispute, you got to go into court.
So let me just clarify for myself and for our listeners. You could have. So, for instance, those bank accounts that we did the wealth care directives are assigned upon death, transferable upon death. So now those no longer fit into the will.
They pass outside of probate.
Of probate.
Passes outside of probate automatically.
So that's amazing.
It's a big thing.
Okay. Now with the trust, you're talking about real estate trust, things like that. So does the transfer of that trust, does the transfer of that trust pass outside of probate court as well?
Yes.
Wow.
But what happens is the probate or the will is something that must go to surrogate's court. It's a public document. Okay. Access by anyone at all who wants to look up the records. Okay. Whereas a trust is a private agreement between me. I'll call me the one with the property. We'll call me the grantor. Okay. Or we can call me the trustor, or we can call me the guy with the money. Okay. I got something. I want to put it into my trust. What I do is I then go ahead and I create trustees. Okay. And
almost beneficiaries.
But no, right. They can be beneficiaries.
Okay.
A beneficiary could be a trustee as well.
Okay.
So now that is a totally separate document. Okay. We incorporate in the trust. We actually get a tax ID number from the IRS because it's a separate person, a trust, just the way an LLC is a separate person or a subchapter S corporation is a separate person, a subchapter C. These are corporate individual entities.
So, question. It almost sounds to me, and please explain, that in that trust, are you protected from litigation, from probate?
From you may be. That's why sometimes, depending on the fact pattern, okay, we do things a little differently. Mm-hmm. But for your basic trust, generally speaking, you're not going to have litigation over the trust most of the time. Okay? But the average person, particularly here in your the typical suburban community, my biggest asset and most of our biggest asset is our home. Okay. So what we want to do is number one, in New York State, you cannot protect your home from creditors. Okay? There are some states where you can do that.
Explain. You cannot protect your home from creditors?
By putting it into a trust.
Okay?
Creditors always have the right to go after an asset in New York, in the state of New York.
Oh, that doesn't sound too good.
No, that's not good. That's not good. So you just got to be careful. You live within your budget, So now what happens is I am the grantor. I'm putting my home into a trust. In one kind of trust, the trust that most people use, is I become the first a trustee. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm going to call it the Zenner Family Trust. I'm the first trustee. I have the same control I always had. Okay, I can do anything I want with that house. I can go in. I can take my star exemption with me. Mm-hmm. I can go ahead and I can take out another mortgage. I can do whatever I like and take out a reverse mortgage even. Okay, not a problem. And now what I do is I say within my trust that upon my death, and I'm sorry that I'm leaving my wife out of this, it's not intentional, just in case she ever listens. She listens. I have to plan for the future too.
Of course.
So now what happens is I now say the next trustee after I die, okay, the trustee now is going to be my cousin Bill, and I'm directing Bill to sell the house and split the proceeds amongst my 3 children equally. That's just a simple directive. You can put a lot of different things into that trust.
And I know there's couple different kinds of trusts you hear: irrevocable, revocable. So I think that's a whole other.
I'm just talking about your simple revocable family trust right now.
Okay. So there's a lot of things that people need to plan for, whether they own a home, with their bank accounts. There's a lot of medical proxies, power of attorneys. There's a lot of things, simple things to protect you and your loved ones. And the best way to handle this is to sit down with an attorney.
Yeah, sit down with somebody
like John Zenir or a family attorney that you already have. Yeah. And now, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, they can call me on my phone, 516-746-0180. Mm-hmm. My email is John. It's spelled John, which I never thought I would have had to explain anybody how to spell John, but it is what it is. John at JMZESQ.com is my email.
Now, do you work just in New York State, or do you work in other states as well?
My clients are basically in New York State. Okay. Some of them do own homes in other states, and we can work with that issue, not a problem. But I wanted to point out one little thing, 2 things about the trust. Number one, the trust, when I die, my date of death basis for my heirs, for my beneficiary, becomes that dollar amount. I bought my house for $42,500. It's now worth $750,000. Mm-hmm. So there's no major capital gains happening there because it's in the trust.
Wow.
Okay. And
this is something I want to dig into a little bit more with you. And I think I'm definitely going to have you on again, because I want to talk about that, because you hear about inheritance tax, you hear about all sorts of crazy taxes when somebody passes away and they leave money or they leave real estate, and people get these giant tax bills. Yeah. So I would love to. I think that's a whole other segment. To be honest with you.
It is.
But so that's very interesting.
And the trustee who takes over can sell the house immediately. No court, nothing. Well, he's the owner of the house because he's the trustee.
So the ultimate protection is that trust.
The trust. So this way,
Wow.
you get a step up in basis,
Okay.
and you also have the ability to transfer the property immediately upon death.
It's amazing.
Which is such a wonderful thing. I mean, I remember I had a 70-year-old lady whose 85-year-old brother died with a $400,000 condo, I think it was. It took her forever before we got the ability to sell that property. The poor lady had to borrow money from her kids to pay the taxes.
Did you hear that often? It's not something that's rare. You hear that often.
It happens more often than not, I think.
Okay, that's great.
It's unbelievable.
Well, John, thank you so much for being here. You really have been a plethora of information. Just to recap, first step is your medical directives, right? Your healthcare directives, your wealth care directives,
Yep.
basic will, and possibly a trust, just to protect yourself. John would love for you to reach out and just ask any questions. I know I call John all the time. I have my clients call John all the time just to ask questions. And John is really, really flexible, with his answering. You don't have to be a client. He would definitely help you in any way. Of course, he would love the business. And again, John, one more time, how do they get in touch with you with your phone number?
516-746-0180.
Okay.
And my email is john@jmzesq.com. And James, that was a really good conversation. I appreciate it. You're a great questioner to ferret out
No, because
data
these are
and
things that
information.
are so important to me and my listeners and my clients, because these are questions that I speak with seniors all the time and young families, and that don't have these directives in place, and and people think like they're okay, and it's not so much procrastination. Maybe it is. Maybe it's burying your hand in the sand. But I'm here, and this show was originally, to get news out there and information out there about Medicare and health insurance, because of course those are important things that nobody really understands. So that's what this show is about. But then I come across clients all day long and friends and business colleagues that don't have answers to these questions. So that's why I had you on. That's why I had Rosemary Cupfield on, because there's so many interesting things that we need to really absorb and help each other out. And without information, we're making decisions on fear or guessing. And that's why I did this. I want my listeners, my clients, my friends to have answers to their everyday issues that they don't even know about. I want them to be able to plan and be successful, not only in life, but in death as well. And that's why it's so important, for all the stuff that we spoke about today. So I'm definitely going to have you on. I wanted to touch on a couple of other things, with Medicare, but I'll save that for next week. It was a great show, John. I really, really appreciate you being here. I love everything that you had to say. So thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm grateful for the invitation, and also stimulated by the conversation. And I learned stuff from you too.
Amazing.
It's fantastic. It was great, and I agree. The more we learn, the more we can dispense information, the better people will be. And when they make their decisions, they'll feel like they're empowered because they've got the right data. Thank
you, John, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate it. Again, it's James Donnelly, Safe Haven Insurance, your Medicare and health insurance safe place. Have a great week.